The catering company had warned her about the dog. "There's a dog," the coordinator had said, reading off her clipboard in the staging tent like it was an allergy. "Old, big, mean to the staff. Don't feed it, don't pet it, don't make eye contact. Last girl who fed it got a complaint filed. Mr. Renwick's very particular about the dog." Maya Cardell had nodded and tied her apron and thought, privately, that a dog who was mean to the catering staff probably had good reasons, since the catering staff at events like this were treated like furniture that could carry trays. She'd been doing this work for 2 years, banquets, galas, the kind of weddings where the flowers cost more than her car, and she'd learned that the rich and the people who served the rich existed in 2 separate countries that happened to share a lawn for an evening. This particular lawn belonged to Cardell Renwick, and it was less a lawn than a county. The estate sat up in the hills north of the city behind a gate that took a code and a guard and a second code, and the house at the top was the kind of house that didn't photograph because no single photograph could hold it. There were 300 guests expected for what the invitation, Maya had heard, called an intimate evening. Intimate, for the Renwicks, meant only 300 of their closest strangers. She was here because the rent was here. That was the whole of her philosophy about these jobs. $80 for the night plus a share of the tip pool, and a babysitter at home who charged $12 an hour, which meant she'd clear maybe $50 if the night ran short and $40 if it ran long. And either way it was $40 or $50 she didn't have at 3 that afternoon and would have by midnight. And that math was the only math that mattered. Her daughter was 6. Her name was Lily, and she had a gap where her front teeth used to be, and a conviction that she was going to be a marine biologist, despite having seen the ocean exactly once, on a day trip 2 summers ago that Maya had saved 3 months for and would remember, broke as it had left her, as one of the best days of her life. Lily was home tonight with Mrs. Delgado from the 2nd floor, doing a puzzle of a humpback whale that was missing 4 pieces, and Maya had promised to find the pieces, which she would not because they were gone, but the promising bought peace, and the peace bought Maya a night of work. So the dog, the trays, the 2 countries on one lawn. She found the dog within the first hour. It was lying under a table at the far edge of the terrace where the good lighting gave out, a huge gray-muzzled thing, some mix of shepherd and something bigger, and it was not being mean. It was being old. It lay with its chin on its paws and watched the party the way the catering staff watched the party from the outside, from the dark edge, present and unseen. Nobody had given it water. There were ice sculptures melting into troughs and a fountain running champagne, and the dog under the table had a dry tongue and watched 300 people not look at it. Maya was not supposed to. She knew she was not supposed to. There was a complaint on file from the last girl who did exactly this. She filled a clean serving bowl with water from the prep station and carried it out under the guise of clearing the far tables, and she set it down under the table where the dog could reach it without getting up, and she crouched there a moment in the dark in her black uniform and said, quietly, not making eye contact because she'd been told not to and because she respected that a creature this old might want its dignity, "There you go. Nobody has to know." The dog drank. It drank for a long time, the way you drink when you've been thirsty longer than anyone noticed, and when it finished it looked at Maya. She let it. Eye contact be damned, and it put its heavy gray head against her knee, just for a second, the weight of it surprising, and then it sighed an enormous sigh and went back to its chin-on paws and its watching. "Yeah," Maya said, "I know, long night for both of us." And she got up and went back to carrying trays, and she thought that was the end of it. It was not the end of it. A man had been watching from the dark on the other side, where the terrace stairs went down to the lower garden, and he'd seen the whole thing, the water, the crouch, the head against the knee. And he was the one person at the entire party that Maya Cardell most needed not to have noticed her, and his name was Julian Renwick, and the dog was his. The dog's name was Barley, and he was 16 years old, and he was, as far as Julian was concerned, the only honest soul on the property. Julian had given up on the party an hour in. He did this at every party appeared, did the rounds his father required, shook the hands, said the things, and then evaporated to the edges where he could breathe. He was 31 and he'd been doing the rounds at his father's parties since he was old enough to wear a jacket, and he'd developed, over the years, a kind of internal clock that told him exactly how long he had to be charming before he could disappear without it being noted. Tonight the clock had run out early. His father had cornered him by the fountain and steered him, with the particular pressure of a hand on the shoulder that was really a hand on the leash, toward a young woman in a green dress. Vivian Ashford, Cardell Renwick had said in the tone he used for assets. Ashford Capital, you'll like her. She's been to Davos. Julian had liked her fine. That was the trouble. There was never anything wrong with the women his father produced. They were uniformly intelligent, accomplished, beautiful, and as interesting to Julian as a well-written prospectus. Vivian Ashford had talked about her family's foundation and her seat on 2 boards and a horse she kept in Kentucky. And Julian had nodded and asked the right questions, and felt the specific loneliness of being precisely matched with someone you will never love, which his father could not understand was a problem, because his father had married Julian's mother for exactly these reasons, and considered the resulting 40 years a success. Even the part where she'd stopped speaking to him at dinner somewhere, around year 20. So Julian had excused himself to check on the dog, which was true, and also an escape, which was truer. And he'd found a woman in catering black crouched in the dark, breaking the one rule everyone was given about Barley, giving the old dog water that no one else had thought to give him, and saying nobody has to know. And Barley, who genuinely was mean to the staff, who had bitten a groundskeeper and terrorized 2 housekeepers and was tolerated only because he was Julian's and Julian was the heir, Barley had put his head against her knee. Julian had never seen the dog do that with a stranger. He wasn't sure he'd seen the dog do that with anyone but himself. He should have said something then. He didn't, because saying something would have meant she'd know she'd been seen breaking the rule, and he didn't want to be one more rich person making her night harder. So he watched her go back to her trays, and he memorized, without deciding to, the way she moved, efficient and invisible, a person who'd learned to take up no space, and he found himself, for the rest of the night, tracking a woman in catering black across his father's party like she was the only moving thing in a room of statues. He cornered her near midnight by the prep tent, when the crowd had thinned and the work had slowed. He'd thought about how to do it and decided there was no smooth way, so he just walked up, a tall man in a suit that cost more than her month, and said the least smooth thing available. "You gave Barley water." Maya's stomach dropped. She knew the suit, not him specifically but the type, the people who lived in the other country and occasionally crossed the lawn to file a complaint. She'd been caught. There was a complaint on file from the last girl and now there'd be one with her name on it. And $80 was $80, but a bad report could cost her the agency, and the agency was 3 nights a week, and 3 nights a week was Lily's shoes, and the part of the rent the day job didn't cover. "I'm sorry," she said fast, the apology of a person who'd learned that apologizing fast was cheaper than being right slow. "I know I wasn't supposed to. He was thirsty, nobodied. I'll clean it up. It won't happen again, please don't." "He's my dog," Julian said, and watched her brace for it, and hated that she was bracing, hated that he'd put that brace in 100 faces just by being a Renwick in a suit. "And in 16 years I've never once seen him put his head on a stranger. I came over to thank you, that's all. I didn't mean to scare you." Maya stopped, recalibrated, looked at him properly for the first time, and what she saw was not what the suit had promised. The suit promised the other country. The face was just tired. Tired in a way she recognized, because it was her own tired wearing better clothes. The tired of a person performing a version of themselves all day for people who'd never met the real one. "He's a good dog," she said carefully, "just old and thirsty and nobody looking at him. I know the feeling." She heard herself say it and wished she hadn't. You didn't get philosophical with the suits. I should get back. What's your name? Maya. Julian. He didn't offer a hand because he'd noticed hers were full of dirty glassware, and offering a hand would have made her choose between dropping the work and being rude. And the noticing of that, the small mechanical courtesy of not making her choose, was the first thing about Julian Renwick that Maya would later admit had gotten past her guard. Can I ask you something that's none of my business? You can ask. You said you know the feeling, old and thirsty and nobody looking. He tilted his head. Long night. And Maya, who told the suits nothing, who carried her whole life folded small and tucked away where the people on the lawn couldn't use it against her, looked at this man and his tired face and his dog who put his head on no one and said, long life mostly. The night's just the part that pays. Then she picked up her tray of dirty glasses and went back into the light, and Julian Renwick stood in the dark by the prep tent and watched her go for the second time that night, and understood that something had just happened to him that his father was going to consider a catastrophe. She didn't think about him after. She didn't have the room. That was the thing the people on the lawn never understood about people like Maya, that a man like Julian Renwick could spend the whole night thinking about a woman in catering black, could go to bed turning her over in his mind, while the woman herself drove home in a car that pulled to the left, paid Mrs. Delgado from the second floor in 5s and 1s, looked in on her sleeping daughter, and the puzzle of the humpback whale with the 4 missing pieces, and fell into bed without a single thought to spare for the heir to the Renwick fortune, because thinking about men was a luxury, and she'd canceled that subscription years ago when Lily's father proved how much it cost. His name had been Theo, Lily's father. He'd been charming and broke and full of plans, and the plans had stayed plans, and when the test came back positive, the charm had drained out of him over about 6 weeks like air from a slow tire, and one day he'd taken his guitar and his good jacket and left the rest, including the future. Maya had been 23. She'd cried for a while and then she'd stopped, because crying didn't pay Mrs. Delgado, and she'd built a life out of the only materials available to her, which were her own 2 hands and a refusal to let her daughter feel the lack the way Maya felt it. She worked at a flower shop on Cardell Street during the day, petals and stem, owned by a man named Gus who was 70 and gruff, and paid her under what she was worth, but let her bring Lily in after school, which was worth more than the difference. She catered 3 nights a week. She taught herself, off library books and YouTube on the shop's slow afternoons, how to do the cold work and the wiring and the wedding arrangements that Gus's hands were too arthritic for now. And she was good at it, better than good. She had an eye. Gus said so in his gruff way that was the closest he came to praise. You got the eye, kid. I never had the eye, I just had the shop. She dreamed in the small way she let herself dream of her own shop someday. A green door, her name on it. Lily doing homework in the back among the buckets of stems. It was a dream she kept folded as small as everything else, because dreams that size cost money she didn't have and hope she couldn't spare. So no, she didn't think about Julian Renwick. He thought about her enough for both of them. He didn't know her last name. He knew her first name and the catering company, and he was a Renwick, which meant the second was enough to find the first, and he sat with that knowledge for 4 days like a man holding a door he knew he shouldn't open, because Julian understood his own life with a clarity his father lacked. He understood that he was an asset being positioned for a merger, that his marriage, when it came, would be a transaction his father had been structuring since Julian was a boy, and that the women at the parties were candidates in a process, and that his own feelings were a variable his father had simply never entered into the model, because in Cardell Renwick's model feelings were what poor people had instead of strategy. And he understood that finding Maya would be the first genuinely defiant thing he'd done in 31 years, and that defiance in his family was not free. He found her anyway. Of course he found her. He told himself it was about the dog, that he wanted to thank her properly, maybe send something to the shop, a normal human gesture of gratitude. And he held onto that story all the way to Cardell Street, where he stood outside a flower shop called Petals and Stem with its faded green awning and watched, through the window, the woman from the party laughing at something a gruff old man had said, with a little gap-toothed girl doing homework on an upturned bucket beside her. And he understood that the story about the dog was a lie he'd told himself to get here, and that the truth was both simpler and far more dangerous. He almost left. He stood on the sidewalk and nearly turned around, because he could see, through one pane of glass, the entire collision that was coming. His father, his world, this woman, that child, the wreck of it, and some cowardly sensible part of him said, "Leave her be. You'll only bring the storm down on her. The kindest thing you can do is walk away." And then the little girl looked up and saw him through the window, a strange tall man staring in, and instead of being frightened she waved. A big uncomplicated 6-year-old wave, gap-toothed, delighted by nothing, delighted by everything, and Julian Renwick, who had been raised to trust no one's smile because every smile in his world wanted something, found himself waving back at a child who wanted nothing from him at all. And that was that. He went in. A bell rang over the door. The shop smelled green and cold and alive. Maya looked up from the arrangement she was wiring and saw him, and her face did a complicated thing: recognition, then alarm, then the careful blankness she'd perfected for the suits. "You're a long way from the hills," she said. "I wanted to thank you for barley." He was aware of how thin it sounded. He hadn't brought anything. He'd meant to and forgotten because the having of a reason had only ever been a costume. "I didn't bring anything. That's a lie. I came because I couldn't stop thinking about what you said. About long lives and the part that pays." Gus, behind the counter, looked up from his newspaper with the slow interest of a man who'd seen everything and was always pleased to see one more thing. Lily looked up from her homework and said, with the devastating directness of the very young, "Are you Mommy's friend?" And the shop held its breath, Maya frozen with the wire in her hands, Gus with his newspaper half lowered, Julian with no idea in the world how to answer a 6-year-old who just asked the only question that mattered. And into that silence Lily, not waiting because 6-year-olds don't wait, added, "You can help with my puzzle. It's a whale. But 4 pieces are gone forever, Mommy says, so it'll always have holes." She said this without tragedy, as a simple fact of her world. "Some things just have holes. That's okay though. You can still tell it's a whale." Julian crouched down to her level, which put him at eye height with a child and a humpback whale puzzle missing 4 pieces, and he said, gravely, because she'd been grave, "I think that's the smartest thing anyone said to me all year." Maya watched the man from the hills crouch on the floor of Gus's shop to take a 6-year-old's puzzle seriously, and felt the careful blankness she'd perfected crack, just slightly, right down the middle, in a way that frightened her more than any complaint on any file ever had. That night after he'd gone, and he'd stayed nearly an hour, on the floor, working the whale puzzle with Lily, accepting Lily's complete unedited theory of dolphin society, and Maya had let him because telling him to leave would have meant explaining to Lily why. And there was no version of that explanation a 6-year-old would accept. Maya lay in bed in the dark, and did the thing she never let herself do, which was want something she couldn't have. The apartment was 2 rooms and a kitchen you could touch both walls of, on the 3rd floor of a building that the landlord kept exactly as warm as the law required, and not 1 degree warmer. Lily slept in the bedroom. Maya slept on the pull-out in the front room, a fact she'd never once mentioned to anyone at the catering jobs or the flower shop, because the geography of poverty was a thing you kept folded small, and a mother sleeping on a pull-out so her daughter could have a door that closed was exactly the kind of detail the people on the lawn would have used to feel sorry for her, and Maya would rather be hated than pitied. Pity was just contempt with better manners. She listened to Lily breathe through the thin wall. She thought about the man on the floor with the whale puzzle. And she got angry at herself. the specific cold anger she kept for moments of weakness, because wanting was a luxury, and she'd canceled the subscription, and here she was reading the magazine in the dark like she hadn't. She got up. She did the thing she did when the wanting got loud, which was the budget. There was a notebook, a real paper one, because she didn't trust her wanting around a banking app at midnight, and in it, in her small, careful hand, was the whole architecture of their survival. What came in? The shop, the catering, down to the dollar. What went out? Rent, the parts of it the day job didn't cover, Mrs. Delgado, Lily's shoes that she'd grown out of again, the car that needed a thing the mechanic called, the thing keeping you alive on the freeway, and quoted at $400 Maya did not have. And at the bottom, on its own page, underlined twice, the number that was the dream, $38,000, the cost of buying the shop from Gus, the green door, her name, the thing she'd applied for at 3 banks and been told no at 3 banks, the no's stapled into the back of the notebook like pressed flowers, like proof. She looked at the 38,000 for a while. She did the math she always did, the one where she put aside what she could and counted how many years until the number, and the answer was always the same. The answer was never not at this rate, not unless something changes, and the something never changed because some things didn't change for people like Maya. That was practically the definition. In the morning, Lily woke her up by climbing onto the pull-out the way she did, all elbows, smelling of sleep, and announced that she'd had a dream about the whale, the real one, the framed one in her head, and that in the dream the 4 missing pieces had floated up out of the ocean, and the man from the shop had caught them. What man from the shop, Bug? The tall one, Julian. Lily said the name like she'd known it forever. She'd asked him his name on the floor. Maya had heard her. He caught the pieces and put them back, and then the whale could swim. It was a good dream, she considered. Is he coming back? And Maya, who did not lie to her daughter as a matter of policy, because the world would lie to Lily plenty and a mother should be the one fixed honest thing, said the most honest thing she had, which was, I don't know, baby. Probably not. Men like that don't usually come back to shops like ours. He came back twice already, Lily pointed out, with the flat logic of the very young, who keep better count than adults of who shows up. Maya didn't have an answer for that. She made the toast. She got Lily to school. She went to the shop and she did not think about Julian Renwick, except in the way you don't think about a sound you can still hear. And at 4 o'clock when the bell over the door rang, she looked up too fast, and it was only the wholesaler's delivery, and she was annoyed at the speed she'd looked up. And underneath the annoyance, where she didn't examine it, was a thing that felt dangerously like hope, which she could afford even less than she could afford the $400 for the thing keeping her alive on the freeway. It started slow because Maya made it start slow. She had every reason not to start it at all. She said as much plainly the 3rd time he came to the shop, because there was a 3rd time, and a 4th, Julian inventing thinner and thinner reasons until he stopped inventing them and just showed up, and Gus started keeping a 2nd coffee mug behind the counter without comment, which was Gus's version of a blessing. This doesn't make sense, Maya told him. They were outside the shop after closing, Lily inside reorganizing the ribbon spools by color, which she considered the finest job in the world. You know that, right? I cater your father's parties. I water the dog. I'm the help. People like you marry people like that woman in the green dress, the one I served 3 glasses of champagne to. You don't, whatever this is, it doesn't go anywhere, and I've got a kid, and I can't afford to learn that lesson twice. I learned it once already. It was expensive. Julian leaned against the brick. Tell me about the first time, the expensive lesson. Why? Because you keep using it as a wall, and I'd like to know what the wall's made of. Maya looked at him. It was a good answer. That was the trouble with him. He kept giving good answers, kept noticing the real thing under the said thing, and it had been so long since anyone had bothered to notice the real thing under her said thing that the noticing was doing something to her that no amount of charm could have. So she told him about Theo, the plans that stayed plans, the slow leak of the charm, the guitar and the good jacket and the future gone. She told it flat, no self-pity, the way she told everything, and Julian listened the way he listened to the dog and the child completely. And when she was done, he didn't say "I'm sorry," which she'd have hated, and he didn't say "I'm not like him," which she'd have disbelieved. He said he left because the baby made the future real, and he only liked the future when it was a plan he could change his mind about. Julian said it slowly, working it out. Real things were too heavy for him, so he set them down. He looked at her. I come from people who do the opposite. We never set anything down, we just stop feeling it. We keep the marriage and the house and the dog, and we stop. There's a word my mother used to use before she stopped using words at dinner. She said my father was present and accounted for and gone. That was us. Present, accounted for, gone. He pushed off the brick. I don't want to be either of those men, the one who sets it down or the one who keeps it and goes hollow. I watched my parents do the hollow thing for 30 years, and I'd rather be poor and feel something than rich and feel nothing. And I know how that sounds coming from a man in this suit. I know I haven't earned the right to say it, but it's true. And you said you've gone 2 years without anyone telling you a true thing, so there's one. Free. No strings. I think you're the most awake person I've ever met, and I've spent my whole life around people who are asleep with their eyes open. Maya was quiet a long time. That's a very pretty speech, she said finally. It wasn't a speech. I don't make speeches. Speeches are my father's department. It was a little bit of speech. But she was almost smiling, and he saw it, and he didn't push, which was the other thing he never pushed. He'd noticed early that her whole life had been people pushing, and he decided to be the one thing in it that didn't. Okay, here's my true thing back, free, no strings. I'm scared of you, not of you, of what you'd cost me. Because Lily's 6 and she waves at strangers and she takes people at face value. And if I let you into her life and you turn out to be the future your father changes his mind about, she's the one who pays, not me. I'm used to paying. She isn't. So if you're going to disappear, Julian, disappear now before she names you. Because the second she names you, you're hers, and I won't forgive you for what it does to her. I'll forgive almost anything that's only done to me. I won't forgive what's done to her. Julian Renwick stood on Cardell Street in the dark and understood that he was being given a door, and that walking through it meant a war with his father he might lose, and that everything past the door belonged to a 6-year-old with a gap in her teeth who'd already, without asking anyone, started to matter to him more than his entire inheritance. I'm not going to disappear, he said. Don't say it if it isn't true. I'm not going to disappear, he said again, and this time it had the weight of a thing decided, the weight of Barley's head against her knee, and Maya heard the weight in it and was, against every instinct she'd spent 6 years building, inclined to believe him. So she let it start, slow on her terms the way she'd said. The first real outing wasn't dinner, because Maya wouldn't be taken to the kind of dinner Julian knew how to take a person to, and Julian was smart enough not to try. Instead, it was the aquarium, because of Lily, because the whole thing came with Lily attached, and Julian seemed to understand that the way to Maya wasn't around her daughter but straight through the middle of her, that a man who wanted Maya and merely tolerated Lily was a man Maya would have walked into traffic to get away from, and a man who wanted the both of them was the only kind worth the risk. He'd offered to buy the tickets. Maya had said she'd buy her own and Lily's, and Julian had started to argue, and then he'd watched her face and stopped and bought only his, and that was the moment Maya understood he could be taught. Lily's father had never once been able to be taught. You'd explain a thing and Theo would nod and do it his way anyway, because being taught meant admitting he'd been wrong, and Theo would rather drown than admit. Julian heard the thing about the tickets, understood the pride under it, and adjusted. No sulk, no speech. It was such a small thing. It told her everything. Lily lost her entire mind at the aquarium. She'd seen the ocean once, 2 summers and 3 saved-up months ago, and here was the ocean in walls. Here were the things she'd only read about on the shop's slow afternoons. And she dragged Julian by the hand from tank to tank, delivering a running expert commentary that was about 60% accurate and 100% certain. And Julian, who'd been to Davos, whose father produced women who'd been to Davos, followed a 6-year-old around an aquarium being lectured about cuttlefish and looked. Maya thought, watching him, happier than any man she'd ever seen in an actual suit. At the jellyfish in the blue light, while Lily pressed her whole face to the glass, Julian said quietly, "I never did this, any of this. My father didn't do outings. There were no outings. There were appearances. We went places to be seen at them. I don't think I've ever once been somewhere just to be there." He watched the jellyfish drift. "She doesn't know she's doing me a favor, showing me how to be somewhere." "Don't," Maya said. "Don't what?" "Don't make my kid into your therapy. She's not here to fix you. She's here because she likes fish." But there wasn't much heat in it, because she'd seen his face, and his face wasn't a man using a child. It was a man genuinely undone by being shown a normal thing late, and Maya knew that particular wound from the other side. She'd been shown normal things on schedule and had nothing, and he'd been shown nothing on schedule and had everything, and somehow they'd both arrived at the same place, 2 people who knew exactly what the other was missing. "You're right," he said. "I'm sorry she likes fish. I'll just like fish too." And he crouched down next to Lily at the glass and asked her a real question about the jellyfish, and Lily answered it at length and incorrectly and with total authority, and Julian received the wrong answer like a gift, and Maya stood behind the 2 of them in the blue light and felt the careful blankness crack the rest of the way, all the way down, past the place where she could pretend it hadn't. They talked after, while Lily slept in the back of Maya's car, worn out from a day of marine expertise. Stood in the parking lot by the car that pulled left and talked the way you talk when a day has gone better than you let yourself expect. "Tell me the thing you're not telling me," Maya said. "About your life, there's a thing. You've got the look of a man managing how much I know." Julian was quiet a moment. "My father's going to find out about you. He has people whose whole job is knowing where I go, and I've never given them anything to report, so they got lazy, but a day at the aquarium with a woman and a child is going to be a report. And when he reads it, he's going to do something. I don't know what, but something. That's the thing I'm not telling you because I don't want it to be true, and saying it out loud makes it true." He looked at her. "I should have told you before the aquarium, not after. I let you have the day first. That was selfish. I wanted one clean day before the part where my family becomes your problem." Maya leaned against the car. She thought about being angry. He'd known. He'd brought the storm to her daughter's aquarium day without warning, and decided she wasn't because he'd told her, late but he'd told her, which was more than anyone in her life had reliably done. "Here's what you're going to learn about me," she said. "If you stick around long enough to learn things, I'm not afraid of your father. I've been afraid of the rent and the freeway and Lily getting sick on a week I can't miss work. Those are real, those keep me up. A rich man being mad I exist. That's not a fear, that's a Tuesday. I've been disliked by powerful people my whole life. Landlords, supervisors, the lady at the benefits office who decided she didn't like my face. I'm fluent in being a problem to people who can hurt me. So whatever your father does, he's going to find out I'm a lot harder to move than he expects, because the people who tried to move me before him had something I needed, and he's going to assume the same, and he's going to be wrong, because the only thing I need is in the back seat of this car asleep, and he can't touch her, and as long as he can't touch her, he can't touch me." She opened the car door. "Tell me when he does the something. Don't protect me from it. Protecting me from it is just a nicer way of deciding things without me, and I've had men decide things without me, and I'd rather have the storm than the protection. Deal?" "Deal," Julian said. He would remember that conversation, weeks later, sitting in his father's freezing study learning exactly what the something was, and he would understand that Maya had told him, in a parking lot, precisely how the whole thing would go, that his father would look for her lever and find the shop and push it and be astonished when she didn't move. She'd called it before it happened. She knew her own strength better than Cardell Renwick, with all his researchers, would ever know it, because Cardell measured strength in what a person could lose, and Maya's strength was made entirely of what she'd already decided she could live without. Which was, of course, exactly when his father found out. Cardell Renwick did not rage. Maya would learn that about him. The rage would have been easier. Cardell Renwick was a man who discovered young that cold was more effective than hot, that you got more from people by lowering the temperature than by raising it. And so, when his head of security brought him the report, because of course there was a report, of course a man had been assigned to know where the air went, Julian had simply never thought about the watcher because he'd never given the watcher anything to watch before. Cardell read it twice, set it down, and felt the specific cold descend that his late wife had spent 40 years inside of. A caterer, a florist, a single mother with a child and a car that pulled left and a flower shop on Cardell Street that did, he noted, $11,000 of business in a slow month. His son, the heir to a fortune that took 3 full-time people to manage, was sneaking off to a flower shop to court the help. He did not call Julian. That was beneath the cold. Instead, he did what he always did, which was to study the problem until he found its lever, because every problem had a lever, and the lever was almost never the thing itself. You didn't move a person by pushing on the person. You moved them by pushing on the thing they couldn't bear to lose. He found Maya's lever in about a day. It wasn't hard. Poor people's levers were always the same and always exposed. That was what being poor meant, that your levers were out where anyone could reach them. Hers was the shop. Not even the shop, the dream of the shop, which his researcher had turned up in the form of a loan application Maya had submitted to 3 banks in the last year and been denied by all 3. An application for a small business loan to buy out the retiring Gus and put her own name on petals and stem. $38,000. Denied, 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 no collateral, single income. A credit history scarred by the medical debt that scarred everyone in her bracket. $38,000. To Cardell Renwick it was a rounding error. To Maya Cardell it was the difference between a life and a dream of a life. Cardell Renwick smiled, for the first time since the report, the smile of a man who'd found the lever. He did not yet know that this particular woman could not be moved by the thing he'd found, because he had never in his life met a person whose lever, when you pushed it, pushed back. He invited her to lunch. That was how it was done in his country, the velvet first, the thread underneath. A car came to Cardell Street, a real car with a real driver, and the driver had a note in Cardell Renwick's own hand, which was itself a kind of pressure because men like Cardell didn't write notes. They had notes written, and the personal touch was meant to flatter and unnerve in equal measure. Ms. Cardell, I'd be grateful for an hour of your time. The car will wait. C. Renwick. Maya almost didn't go. Gus told her not to. Nothing good, Gus said, ever came in a car like that. I've buried 2 friends who got in cars like that. But Maya understood that not going only delayed it, that a man who sent a car like that would send a worse thing if the car came back empty, and that she'd rather meet the storm standing up and on her own terms than wait for it to come to Cardell Street, where Lily reorganized the ribbons. So she went. She wore her good dress, the one good dress, and she sat in the back of a car that didn't pull left and watched the city she cleaned and served and catered slide past the window, and she went up into the hills to meet the man who decided she was a problem. He received her in a study the size of her apartment. There was tea. There was a fire in summer because the room was air-conditioned to a temperature that required one, which Maya understood immediately was a power move and almost laughed at. A man so rich he made his own weather and then corrected for it. Cardell Renwick was handsome the way old money is handsome, preserved, silver, immaculate, and he had Julian's bones under 40 more years of getting his way. Thank you for coming, he said. I know it's an imposition. You sent a car. It wasn't really a question. A flicker of something, surprise, maybe even approval, quickly hidden. He'd expected nervous. He got level. No, he admitted. I suppose it wasn't. You're direct. I appreciate that. It'll save us both time. He gestured to a chair. She didn't sit. He noted that too. I'll be direct in return. You're seeing my son. I know your son. I don't know that I'd call it seeing. My son, Cardell continued, as if she hadn't spoken the way men like him continued, is going to inherit a great deal. He has responsibilities he doesn't yet take seriously, to the company, to the family, to a future that was being planned before he was born. That future includes a partner suited to it. You understand. A man in his position can't simply follow his feelings. His feelings aren't only his. They're attached to several thousand jobs and a name that's been built over 4 generations. He let that sit. I don't say this to wound you. You seem like a capable woman, in another life perhaps. But this is the life there is, and in this life you and my son are a category error. And I think underneath, you already know that, because you're clearly intelligent, and intelligent people know the difference between what they want and what's possible. Maya looked at the fire that the room didn't need. You've got a number, she said. Men like you always come to the number, skip to it. I've got to pick my daughter up at 4 and the traffic back down the hill's a nightmare. Julian Renwick paused. He was not used to being hurried toward his own point. But he recovered because he was good, and he opened a leather folder on the desk and turned it toward her, and inside was a cashier's check, and the check was made out to her, and the number on it was $75,000. For the shop, he said, and watched her face for the hit. I had someone look into your circumstances. I hope that doesn't offend you. I find it's kinder to know what would actually help a person than to guess. You've been trying to buy the flower shop. $38,000 to buy out the owner, and you want a cushion for the first hard year. Every small business has a hard first year. 75 gives you the shop free and clear and a cushion besides. Your name on the door. Your daughter's future secured. Everything you've been working toward today, this afternoon, done. He closed the folder partway, leaving the check visible, the way you'd leave a door cracked, in exchange for which you'd stop seeing Julian. Cleanly. No scene, no explanation he could argue with. You'd simply tell him it isn't working, that the gap is too wide, which has the advantage of being true. He'll be hurt. He'll recover. Men recover from this kind of thing remarkably fast, in my experience, especially when the alternative is the slow, grinding misery of a marriage that doesn't fit, which is what I'm actually saving you both from, though I don't expect thanks for it. The fire cracked. Somewhere in the enormous house, a clock that probably cost more than the shop counted off the seconds. Maya looked at the check for a long time. She let herself look at it. She was not going to pretend, even to herself, that $75,000 laid on a desk in front of a woman who'd been denied 38 by 3 banks was nothing. Because it was not nothing. It was the dream with the holes filled in. It was the green door and her name and Lily doing homework among the buckets. It was the end of the car that pulled left and the catering nights and the math that governed her every waking hour. It was everything she wanted, sitting on a desk, and all she had to do was give up a man she'd known 3 months and had been too scared to fully let in anyway. It was, she understood, a genuinely good deal. That was the horror of it. He hadn't lowballed her. He'd found exactly what she wanted and offered enough of it that refusing would be, by every measure she'd lived her whole life by, insane. You did your research, she said quietly. I always do. You found out about the shop, the loan, the banks that said no. She nodded slowly. You know what you didn't find out? She looked up at him, and there was something in her face now that made Julian Renwick, for the first time in the conversation, slightly uncertain. You didn't find out why I want the shop. You found the want. You didn't find the reason under the want. You're like your son that way, except he looks for the reason and you stop at the lever. She stepped closer to the desk, to the check, and Cardell thought for a moment she was reaching for it. She wasn't. She was reading it, committing the number to memory, because she wanted to remember exactly what she was about to turn down, wanted to be able to tell herself the true size of it later on the nights when she'd doubt. I want the shop because I want to build something with my own hands that nobody can take away from me. That's the reason under the want. Something mine, earned, so that my daughter grows up watching her mother make a real thing out of nothing and learns she can do the same. She straightened. And if I take your check, I don't get that. I get a shop, but it's not mine, it's yours. It's a thing a rich man bought to make me disappear. And every single day I'd unlock that green door, I'd know I sold something to get it. And the thing I sold was the exact lesson I wanted the shop to teach her. You'd have given me the building and taken the meaning. That's a bad trade. I make better trades than that. You have to, where I'm from. We can't afford your kind of mistakes. Cardell Renwick stared at her. You're turning down $75,000, he said, and there was real disbelief in it, because in all his decades of finding levers, he had never once met a person who looked at the lever, understood it completely, and declined to be moved by it. I'm turning down $75,000, Maya agreed. And I want to be clear about why, so you don't tell yourself a comfortable story later. I'm not turning it down because I don't want it. I want it so bad I can taste it. I'm going to want it on the drive home, and I'm going to want it at 2 in the morning, and I'm going to want it every time the catering coordinator tells me not to feed the dog. I'm turning it down because the version of me that takes it isn't a mother I'd want my daughter to have. That's it. That's the whole reason. It's not noble. It's just that I've only got the one thing to give her, same as you've only got the one thing to give Julian. Except yours is money and mine is the proof that some things don't have a price, and I'm not selling my one thing to help you keep yours. She picked up her bag. Thank you for the tea. I really do have to get the traffic before 4. She was at the door when he spoke again, and his voice had changed. The velvet gone, the cold underneath showing through, the voice of a man whose lever had pushed back. If you don't take this, Cardell Renwick said, I'll make it difficult, the shop, your work. You understand I can do that. A flower shop on Cardell Street depends on suppliers, on a landlord, on a permit or two, on event contracts. Your catering agency, for instance, does a great deal of business with people who take a call from me. I'd prefer not to. I'm offering you the kind way first. But I'll make it difficult, Ms. Cardell, if you make me, and difficult for you is a very different thing than difficult for me. Maya stood in the doorway with her hand on the frame, and she did not turn around because she didn't want him to see that the threat had landed, that it had found the real fear, the Lily fear, the 4 o'clock fear. She let him think it hadn't landed. She'd learned that too, where she was from, you never let them see the thing land. Do what you have to do, she said to the door, not to him. I've been poor my whole life, Mr. Renwick. I know how to be poor. The question is whether your son knows how to watch you do this and still call you his father, because that's the lever you're not seeing. You keep looking for mine. You should be a lot more worried about your own. And she walked out, past the fire the room didn't need, down the steps to the car that didn't pull left, and she did not cry until the gate was behind her, and the driver couldn't see in the mirror. And then she cried the whole way down the hill, for the shop she'd just turned down, and the war she'd just started, and the daughter she'd done both of those things for, who was waiting at the school gate at 4 with a backpack, and a gap in her teeth, and no idea that her mother had just refused a fortune to keep from teaching her the wrong thing. She didn't tell Julian. That was her first decision, made on the drive down, and she held to it even when it got hard, because she understood something Cardell hadn't counted on. That if she told Julian, the war became Julian's war, son against father, and she'd seen what those wars did to families, and she would not be the woman who broke a family, even one as cold as the Renwicks. If Julian was going to break with his father, it had to be Julian's choice, made with his own eyes open, not a thing Maya engineered by playing the victim. So she carried it alone. She'd carried things alone before. But Cardell was as good as his threat, and the difficulty came, and it came the way he'd promised, through the suppliers and the landlord and the contracts, quiet and deniable and everywhere at once. The wholesaler who'd sold Gus flowers for 30 years suddenly couldn't extend the shop credit anymore. New policy. Nothing personal. Cash up front going forward. Which for a flower shop that lived on the float between buying and selling was a slow strangulation. The catering agency cut Maya's nights from 3 to 1, and the coordinator wouldn't meet her eyes when she did it, and mumbled something about client feedback that they both knew was a lie. A permit Gus had renewed without incident for 40 years got flagged for review. The landlord, who'd never once raised the rent in a decade, sent a letter about bringing it to market rate, which meant doubling it, which meant the end. Gus figured it out before Maya told him. He was old, not stupid. "It's the rich kid's father," Gus said, on a slow gray afternoon, not looking up from the rose stems he was stripping with hands too arthritic to do it fast anymore. "Isn't it? All of it at once like this. That's not bad luck. Bad luck comes one at a time. This is a man with a list." "Gus, don't," he set down the stems. "I'm 71, kid. I was gonna sell you this shop and go live with my sister in the desert and die slow watching golf. That was the plan. And now some hill country son of a bitch is gonna take it apart because you wouldn't let his boy date the help." He wasn't angry at her. She could see that. He was something worse than angry. He was tired in the bone-deep way of a man watching the one thing he'd built get dismantled by a force he couldn't fight. "What'd he offer you to walk away?" "There was an offer. There's always an offer before the squeeze." "75,000. Gus whistled low. "And you said no." "I said no." "Why?" It wasn't an accusation. He genuinely wanted to know, the way Julian wanted to know things, the way the good ones always wanted the reason under the want. 75 grand, kid. That's the shop and then some. That's Lily's braces and college and a car that doesn't try to kill you on the merge. You could have taken it and we'd both have been fine and the rich kid would have gotten over it. Why'd you say no?" And Maya told him what she'd told Cardell, about the reason under the want, about the lesson and the meaning and the one thing she had to give. And Gus listened, and when she was done he was quiet for a while, stripping roses with his bad hands, and then he said something she didn't expect. "My father had a shop," Gus said. "Watches. Repaired watches, sold a few. Little place smaller than this. And when I was about Lily's age a man came and offered to buy him out, big operator, wanted the corner for something else, and my father said no because it was his, and the man made it difficult, same as your hill country bastard, and my father lost the shop anyway in the end, lost it slow, and we were poor after in a way we hadn't been before." He set down the last rose. "And you know what? I never once, not one day of my life, wished he'd taken the money. Not once. Because the man who said no to that operator, that's the man I got to have for a father. A man who said no. You don't know what that's worth to a kid until you're old and you realize most people's fathers said yes." He looked at her with wet old eyes. "You said no, kid. Whatever happens to this shop, you already gave Lily the only thing that matters, same as my father gave me. The shop's just a building. Don't you cry about the building. The building was never the thing." Maya cried about the building anyway, and Gus let her. And then he made tea on the hot plate in the back and they sat among the buckets of dying on schedule flowers and figured out how long they had. Which was not long, maybe 6 weeks, before the squeeze closed all the way. What neither of them knew, what Julian Renwick had been careful to keep from everyone, was that Julian had started asking questions. Because the heir was not, in fact, asleep with his eyes open like the rest of his world. He'd noticed his father's particular cold settle over the house. He'd noticed Maya pull back, the catering nights she suddenly had free that she wouldn't explain, the way she'd started flinching at her own phone. He'd noticed, when he came to the shop, the empty cooler that used to be full, the worry in Gus's face. The rent letter Maya tried to slide under the register before he could see it and didn't quite manage. And Julian Renwick, who had spent 31 years not fighting his father because fighting his father had never been worth the cost, did the math on what was happening to the woman he loved and the old man and the gap-toothed child, and found, for the first time in his life, a thing that was worth the cost. He just had to find out exactly what his father had done. And he knew, because he was his father's son and had inherited the one useful thing, exactly how to find out. He found out by being underestimated, which was a thing he'd always been and had always resented, and now, for the first time, found useful. His father's people talked freely around Julian because Julian had never once, in 31 years, given them a reason to be careful. He was the heir who showed up at parties and disappeared to the edges, the soft son, the disappointment Cardell discussed with his advisors as a problem to be managed. So when Julian started taking an interest, sitting in on calls, asking about the company's vendor relationships, the catering contracts, the commercial real estate holdings on the east side of the city, which streets do we have leverage on, just curious, trying to learn the business finally, Dad will be pleased, they told him. They were pleased themselves. The soft son was finally growing up. They handed him, piece by piece, the entire shape of what Cardell had done. The call to the wholesaler, the word to the catering agency, the pressure on the landlord who, it turned out, leased the Cardell Street building from a holding company that the Renwicks held a controlling interest in, which was why the rent letter had come, which was the lever under the lever. It took Julian 9 days to assemble the whole picture, and when he had it, he did not confront his father in a rage, because rage was hot and his father had taught him, by negative example, that cold one. Instead, he did something his father never saw coming, because it required understanding people as something other than levers, which was the one skill Cardell had never bothered to develop, and Julian had developed precisely, because he'd spent his whole life being on the receiving end of the lever and knowing how it felt. He went to see his mother. Julian Renwick lived mostly in the East Wing, in a set of rooms she'd retreated into over the years the way a tide goes out slowly, then all at once, until one day you look and the water's just gone. She and Cardell had not shared a meaningful conversation in over a decade. She painted. She read. She had, Julian had always assumed, simply given up, the way his father said she'd given up. Your mother checked out years ago, Julian, don't take it personally. What Julian discovered, sitting in his mother's bright cluttered rooms for the first time in years, was that his mother had not given up at all. She'd retreated. There's a difference, and he'd been too young when it happened to know it, and his father had been only too happy to call retreat surrender because surrender was less frightening to live beside. She turned down the money, Julian told his mother. He told her everything. It came out of him in a flood, years of it, and Julian Renwick listened the way her son listened, the way the dog leaned completely. 75,000. Dad offered her the shop, everything she wanted to walk away from me, and she said no. And now he's destroying her for it, quietly, so I won't see it. He's taking apart a flower shop and an old man's retirement and a single mother's whole life, and he thinks I'm too soft to even notice. And Mom, his voice broke. The worst part is he's not entirely wrong, because I have been too soft my whole life. I let him run everything because fighting him cost more than I wanted to pay. And the price of all that softness is that a woman who's braver than I've ever been is losing everything for the crime of being loved by a coward. Julian Renwick set down her tea. You're not a coward, she said. You're a person who grew up understanding that in this house, the cost of fighting your father was being alone. I know because I paid it. I fought him, Julian, once, really fought him about you, about how he was raising you, about the leash. And he won the way he wins by making the rest of my life cold. And I made a choice that I have regretted every day since, which was to retreat instead of leave. I told myself I was staying for you. That was a lie I needed. I stayed because leaving was the brave thing, and I'd already learned what brave cost in this house. She looked at her son with 40 years of regret in her face. So when I tell you that this woman, this florist, did in one afternoon the thing I couldn't do in 40 years, looked your father in the eye and said no to the lever, I want you to understand that I'm not impressed. I'm ashamed. Ashamed that a stranger had the spine I didn't. And glad, so glad that my son fell in love with the spine instead of the green dress. She took his hand. Don't you dare retreat, Julian. Don't you become me. whatever it costs. I have spent 40 years finding out what the not fighting costs, and I promise you it costs more. The cold you're so afraid of, I've lived in it since before you were born. It's not as cold as you think. You survive it. What you don't survive is knowing you let the bravest person you ever met go down alone, because you were afraid of whether you could have survived. Julian sat in his mother's bright rooms and understood that the woman his father had written off as having given up had been, all along, the only other person in the house who was awake. "How do I fight him?" he asked. "He holds everything. The money, the company, the buildings, the contracts. He could cut me off tomorrow and I'd have nothing. I don't even know how to. I've never earned a dollar that didn't come from him. He made sure of that. That was the leash." "How do you fight a man who owns the ground you stand on?" And Alina Renwick smiled, and it was the first real smile Julian had seen on his mother in longer than he could remember. And she got up and went to a locked drawer in the desk by the window and took out a folder, old, worn at the edges. A folder she'd clearly been keeping for a very long time, waiting for a day she'd maybe stopped believing would come. "You fight him," she said, "the way I should have, not with rage, with leverage. He taught us both that everything has a lever, and he's right, it does. And the thing about a man who spent his whole life finding everyone else's lever is that he gets careless about his own, because he's never once been on the receiving end." She set the folder on the table. "I've been Mrs. Cardell Renwick for 41 years. Do you have any idea the things I've watched him do? The things I know? I retreated, Julian. I never left the house. A woman who never leaves the house sees everything." She opened the folder. "I never used it. I told myself I was keeping it for protection in case he ever tried to put me out. But maybe I was keeping it for you, for this. For the day my soft son finally found something worth being hard about." She slid it across to him. "Sit down. We have a great deal to talk about, and not much time, because you said she's got 6 weeks. And I intend to see your father lose this one. If it's the last thing I do with the back half of a life, I let him freeze." The showdown happened in the study with the fire that the room didn't need, the same study, the same fire, where Maya had turned down $75,000 3 weeks before. Julian thought about that as he came in. He thought about Maya standing on this carpet, level and broke and unmovable, and he used the thought like a hand on his own back, pushing him forward. Cardell was at the desk. He didn't look up right away, a power move so familiar Julian could have set a watch by it, the air made to wait, made small, made to understand who controlled the clock. 3 weeks ago it would have worked. Today Julian simply sat down uninvited in the chair across the desk, the way Maya hadn't, and waited his father out. And after a moment Cardell looked up with the cold already on, because the cold was always on. "You've been asking my people questions," Cardell said. "About vendors, about the Cardell holdings. They were flattered. They thought you were finally taking an interest." A thin smile. "I assume you weren't." "I was taking a very specific interest." Julian set the folder on the desk. He didn't open it. He'd learned that from his father too. You don't open the folder, the closed folder is louder. "I know what you did to her. The wholesaler, the agency, the permit, the rent. I traced all of it. It wasn't even hard, Dad. You were sloppy, because you were sure I was too soft to look. And I want you to sit with that for a second, that the thing that beat you here was your own contempt for your son. You made me invisible to your own security, and then did your dirty work in front of the invisible man." Cardell's smile didn't move, but something behind the eyes did. She turned down a generous offer. Actions have consequences. She chose the hard road. I merely declined to pave it for her. "You're destroying a flower shop and an old man's retirement to punish a woman for not selling me. Call it what it is. You're not declining to pave a road, you're salting a field." Julian leaned forward. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to call all of it off. Today. The wholesaler, the agency, the permit, the rent, all of it. Back to exactly where it was before you touched it. And you're going to make sure it stays there. And you're never going to so much as drive down Cardell Street again." Caldwell actually laughed. Or what? You'll be disappointed in me. You'll move out of the guest house I let you live in, quit the job I created for you, give back the allowance that pays for the suit you're wearing. You have nothing, Julian. You've never had anything that wasn't mine. That was deliberate. I made certain of it because a son with his own money is a son who can leave, and I had no intention of building a man I couldn't hold on to. He spread his hands. So by all means, threaten me. With what? And Julian opened the folder. He'd thought a great deal over the 9 days about whether he could do this, whether he was the kind of man who could sit across from his own father and use a weapon his mother had spent 40 years assembling in the dark. It was not a clean thing. He knew it wasn't clean. Maya, he thought, would have found a cleaner way, or no way, would have just taken the loss standing up. But Maya had taken the loss standing up. That was exactly the problem. She'd stood there and let herself be destroyed rather than make it Julian's war. And Julian had decided that her refusing to make it his war didn't mean it wasn't his war. Some things you pick up because the person they belong to is too good to pick them up themselves. So he opened the folder and he told his father quietly, without heat, exactly what was in it. He didn't have to say much. Caldwell read the first page and his face did the thing Julian had never once seen it do, the thing 40 years of marriage had taught a leaner to recognize and wait for. It went still. Not cold still, the practiced kind. Still like a man who just felt the floor move under a house he'd believed was on bedrock. "Where did you get this?" Caldwell said, very quiet. "Does it matter?" But it did matter, and they both knew it mattered, because there was only one person alive who could have assembled this, only one person who'd been in the house for all of it, and Julian watched his father arrive at the answer, a leaner, and watched something cross his face that might, in a warmer man, have been grief. The specific grief of a man discovering that the wife he'd frozen out 40 years ago had been awake the whole time, taking notes, waiting. "Your mother," Caldwell said. "My mother," Julian agreed. "The one who gave up, the one who checked out, the one you told me not to take personally." He closed the folder. "She didn't give up, Dad. She just stopped letting you see her watch. You taught her everything has a lever, same as you taught me. The only difference between you and her is that she spent 40 years finding yours and never used it because she's a better person than you, and you mistook the mercy for weakness, the way you mistake everything for weakness." He stood. "Call it off, all of it, today. And in exchange, this folder goes back in the drawer it came from and stays there. Mom keeps it. Think of it as the floor under the rest of your life. You behave, it stays a floor. You come after Maya again, after the shop, after Gus, after any of them ever, and it stops being a floor." He picked up the folder. "Those are the terms. You'll notice they're generous, more generous than the ones you offered her. I learned negotiation from you, but I learned the generosity somewhere else." Cardell Renwick sat at his desk in front of the fire the room didn't need, and for a long moment he was just an old man who discovered, too late, the price of 40 years of cold. "You'd really do this," he said, "over a caterer." "Over a person," Julian said. "That's the thing you've never been able to compute, and it's why you're going to die in this freezing room alone. You keep saying a caterer, a florist, a single mother, like the words are the size of her. She's the largest person I've ever met. She turned down enough money to change her whole life because taking it would have cost her something she couldn't name a price on, and you sat right there and watched her do it and learned nothing, because a thing without a price doesn't exist in your math." He went to the door. "Call it off by end of day or the folder stops being a floor. And Dad, Mom's leaving you. She told me this morning. I'm not threatening you with that, it's not leverage, it's just true, and you should hear it from someone, and it's not going to be you, because you'll never ask. She's leaving and she's taking the folder, and the only thing standing between you and the contents of it is your behavior for the rest of your life. I'd behave if I were you. You're going to be alone, and a man with your enemies shouldn't also have that folder loose in the world. Consider it the last favor your soft son ever does you." He left. He didn't slam the door. You end it by walking out of the room. Maya's lesson, which was really Caldwell's lesson, which Julian had finally turned around and used on the man who taught it. By end of day, the squeeze began to lift. Maya found out something was happening when the wholesaler called Gus to apologize. It was a strange call. The wholesaler, Pine, 30 years a supplier, the man who'd cut their credit on a week's notice, called to say the credit was restored, more than restored, and that there'd been a misunderstanding, and that he hoped Gus understood it had never been personal. It had been pressure from above, and the pressure had lifted, and there was a warmth in his relief that told Gus the man had hated doing what he'd done and was glad to be let off the hook. The catering agency called Maya the same week, restored her nights, 3 of them, 4 if she wanted, apologized in the same careful way for the scheduling issue. The permit review on the shop was quietly closed. The landlord sent a second letter withdrawing the first, the rent staying exactly where it had been for a decade. Maya didn't understand it. She'd braced for the squeeze to close all the way, and instead it was opening, every finger of it lifting at once, and a squeeze didn't open on its own any more than bad luck came all at once. Someone had done this, and she had a guess who, and the guess frightened her almost as much as the squeeze had, because if Julian had gone to war with his father over her, then she'd become exactly the thing she'd refused to be, the woman who broke a family. He came to the shop that evening. She knew before the bell finished ringing by the weight of him in the doorway that something had changed in him. He stood differently. The tired was still there, but underneath it was something new, something with a spine in it. "You did this," she said. "The wholesaler, the agency. All of it, you made him stop." "I made him stop." "Julian," she set down the shears. Lily was in the back, audibly negotiating with the ribbon spools. Gus had tactfully found something to do in the cooler. "What did it cost you? Tell me the truth. What did you have to give him to make him stop? Because your father doesn't stop for free. I sat in that study. I know exactly what kind of man." "I didn't give him anything." Julian came to the counter. "I took something. There's a difference. You taught me the difference, actually, the night you told me about Theo, the man who sets things down versus the man who keeps them and goes hollow. I figured out there's a third kind of man, the kind I'd never been allowed to be, the kind who picks a thing up and carries it even when it's heavy and even when it costs. So I picked this up." He took a breath. "I went to my mother. Everyone thinks she gave up years ago. She didn't. She retreated and she watched, and she spent 40 years quietly knowing exactly who my father is and what he's done, and she gave me, let's call it leverage. Enough that when I sat down with him yesterday and laid it out, he understood that the cost of destroying you had become higher than the cost of leaving you alone. That's the only language he speaks. I didn't beg him. Begging doesn't work on him. You know that. You tried direct, and direct doesn't work either. The only thing that works is making the math stop favoring cruelty. So I changed the math." Maya stared at him. "You blackmailed your own father." "I rebalanced an unfair negotiation using information I was entitled to," Julian said, and almost smiled. "But yes, functionally, I blackmailed my father." The almost smile faded. "And I want to be honest with you about what it means, because you've been honest with me about everything and you deserve the same. It means there's a cost coming for me. He's not going to forgive this, not the leverage and not that I used it. I've spent 31 years as his heir, and as of yesterday I'm something closer to his enemy. He hasn't cut me off yet. My mother's leverage is keeping him from the worst of it, but the warmth's gone, what little there was, and it's not coming back. I'm going to inherit a lot less than I was raised to expect, maybe nothing. And I'm going to have to learn how to earn a living like a person, which I've never once done, and I'll probably be bad at it for a while." He looked at her steadily. "I'm telling you all this because you said something to me, the first real conversation we had. You said if I was going to disappear before Lily named me. You said you'd forgive almost anything done to you but not what's done to her. So I need you to understand exactly what you'd be signing up for, because it isn't the fairy tale. It's not the heir sweeping in with the fortune. It's a man who just lit his fortune on fire and isn't entirely sure he knows how to be poor. asking a woman who knows exactly how to be poor whether she'd be willing to teach him, and raise a kid with him, and maybe run a flower shop with him, since I'm going to need a job and I'm told I'm a fast learner. The shop was very quiet. In the back, Lily had stopped negotiating with the ribbons. "You're not joking," Maya said. "I have never been less joking in my life. You'd give it all up, the money, the whole thing, for a flower shop and a single mom and a kid who isn't yours." And Julian Renwick said the thing that Maya would tell Lily about someday, when Lily was old enough to understand it, the thing that finally cracked the last of the careful blankness Maya had spent 6 years building. "She is mine," he said. "That's the part your math is missing, the same part my father's math was missing. You keep doing the arithmetic where Lily's a cost and the money's the asset. But I sat on the floor of this shop and helped a 6-year-old with a whale puzzle that's missing 4 pieces, and she told me some things just have holes and that's okay, you can still tell it's a whale. And I've thought about that every day since, because I grew up in a family that had everything and was missing every important piece. A whale you couldn't tell was a whale, all the pieces and no shape. And here's this kid with 4 pieces gone who knows exactly what she is." He reached across the counter, not for her hand, just laid his own palm up on the wood, an offer, no pressure, the way he did everything. "I don't want your father's whole whale with the shape missing. I want the one with the holes that you can still tell is a whale. I want the thing that's real even though it's incomplete. That's not me giving anything up, Maya. That's me finally getting the only thing I ever actually wanted. The money was never the asset. I just got raised by a man who couldn't tell the difference, and I'd rather be poor and able to tell the difference than rich and blind to it like him." He left his hand there. "So, slow as you want. No strings, but I'm not disappearing. I picked it up. I'm carrying it. The only question left is whether you'll let me carry it next to you." Maya looked at his hand on the counter for a long time. Then a small voice from the doorway to the back said, "Mommy, is he staying?" Lily, who'd come out from the ribbons, who'd heard more than a 6-year-old should and understood it in the way 6-year-olds understand things, sideways and completely. "Because I finished the whale. It still has the holes, but you can tell it's a whale. I want to show him." And Maya Cardell, who had turned down $75,000 on a desk in front of a fire that a room didn't need, who had carried her whole life folded small where no one could use it against her, who had spent 6 years being the only one looking at the old thirsty dog in the dark. Maya put her hand in Julian's on the counter, in front of her daughter and the old man now standing in the cooler doorway pretending he had something in his eye, and she said, "Yeah, baby. Show him the whale." Cardell Renwick did not come around. That would have been a lie, and this was not a story that traded in the lie where the cold man melts overnight because love is magic. Love is not magic. It's just a different kind of math, and some people never learn to do it. And Cardell was 66 years old and had been doing the other arithmetic too long to switch. He cut Julian off, not all the way, because Aliner's leverage held a floor under it, but the inheritance was gone. The company roll was gone. The name on the building was, by Cardell's decree, no longer Julian's to use. He told people his son had thrown his life away on a caterer. He believed it. He would, Maya suspected, go to his grave believing it. A man who'd die rich and right and alone in a house he'd air-conditioned cold enough to need a fire. But Aliner came around. Aliner came all the way around, because Aliner had been waiting 40 years for a reason to come out of the East Wing, and her son had finally given her one. She left Cardell that spring, quietly, with the leverage ensuring she left whole. 41 years of marriage ended not with rage but with a woman simply walking out of the cold and into the sun she'd forgotten existed. She got a small place near the shop. She started painting things people could see. And she became, to Lily, the grandmother the child had no biological claim to and acquired anyway, because that was how Lily acquired everyone, sideways and completely, by waving at them through a window until they came in. The shop stayed. Maya bought it from Gus, not with $75,000 from a desk, but the slow, honest way, a payment plan the old man structured to be gentle. I'm not selling it to you, kid, I'm leaving it to you on layaway. There's a difference, and the difference is the whole point. Gus moved to the desert and his sister and the slow golf death he'd planned, and he sent postcards, and on every postcard he wrote the same thing in his shaky hand. Building's fine. How's the thing? The building was never about. And Maya would write back, the thing's good, Gus, the thing's real good. Julian learned the trade. He was, as promised, bad at it for a while. He killed an entire order of orchids through overwatering, which Maya never let him forget, the heir who could drown a flower, but he had his mother's eye, it turned out, the painter's eye, and he got good at the color work. The arrangements, the part Maya had the eye for too, and they built it together, the slow, real way, the way you build a thing that's yours. The green door went up that summer, Maya's name on it, and under her name, after some argument, because Julian hadn't wanted it there and Maya had insisted, a second name, because a thing you build together has both names on the door or it isn't built together. That was Maya's rule, and she didn't bend it. And the whale puzzle, the one missing 4 pieces, Julian had framed. He took it to a shop and had it set behind glass exactly as it was, holes and all, and he hung it in the back room of the flower shop where Lily did her homework among the buckets. And when people asked about it, and people asked, it was a strange thing to frame, a puzzle with holes. Lily would explain, with the gravity she gave to important things, that some things just have holes, and that's okay. You can still tell it's a whale, and that her dad said it was the smartest thing anyone ever told him. And that he'd married her mom partly because of it, which wasn't quite the whole story but was close enough for a child to tell, and true enough that the adults who heard it usually had to find something in their own eye. Barley came to live with them. That was the strangest turn, and the one that told Maya more about what Julian had given up and what he'd gained than anything else. Cardell didn't want the dog. The dog was Julian's, and Cardell was purging the house of Julian. And so the 16-year-old shepherd and something who'd been mean to every member of the catering staff and had bitten a groundskeeper came down out of the hills to live above a flower shop on Cardell Street, and he was old, and he didn't have long, and everyone knew it. But he had a good year. He spent it lying in the sun in the shop window where the light was best, watching the street the way he'd watched the party, except now someone always filled his water bowl, and a gap-toothed girl read to him about marine biology, and the last thing in his long life that Barley knew was that he was, finally, looked at. He died in the spring, in the sun, in the window, with Lily's hand on his gray head. They buried him in the little plot behind the shop where Gus used to compost the dead-on-schedule flowers, and Lily made a marker, because Lily made markers for things that mattered, and it said, Barley. Somebody looked ATHIM. Maya thought about the night of the party sometimes, in the slow gray afternoons at the shop, with the bell over the door and the smell of cold green stems, and Julian killing the occasional orchid in the back, and Lily growing up among the buckets with 2 names on the door above her. She thought about how close she'd come to not feeding the dog. There'd been a complaint on file. She'd been warned. The safe thing, the smart thing, the thing that protected the $80 and the agency and the careful invisible life, was to leave the old thirsty animal in the dark and carry her trays and take up no space and get home to Lily. And she'd nearly done exactly that, because nearly doing exactly that was how she'd survived for 6 years. And she'd fed him anyway. Crouched in the dark and given a thing, nobody was looking at the one thing it needed. Nobody has to know, and she'd meant it. She'd done it for no reward and expected none, and would have done it again the same way if it had cost her the night's pay. Because that was who she was when nobody was watching. And it turned out somebody had been watching. Somebody on the dark edge of the same party who'd spent his whole life among people who never once gave anything to a thing that couldn't pay them back. That was the part she'd tell Lily when Lily was old enough. Not the part about the billionaire and the heir and the fortune turned down. Those were the parts people wanted, the parts that sounded like a fairy tale. The part that was true, the part that mattered, was smaller and harder and didn't sound like anything. That you give the dog the water in the dark whether or not anyone's looking, and you turn down the check whether or not it costs you the shop. And you do these things not because they pay, they usually don't. The dog can't pay, the principal can't pay, but because they're the only things you actually own. The money they can give you and take away. The shop they can buy and burn. The one thing they can't touch is who you are when the catering coordinator tells you not to feed the dog, and you look at the old thirsty animal in the dark and decide, for no reward, with nobody watching, to fill the bowl anyway. Cardell Renwick spent his whole life learning everyone's lever, and died never knowing he'd raised a son who'd choose a flower shop over a fortune, because he could never once imagine that the flower shop was the larger thing. Maya Cardell never learned everyone's lever. She only ever knew one thing, the thing Gus's father knew and Gus knew and now Lily would know. That some people say yes to the check and some people say no, and the no costs you the building, and the building was never the thing. The bell rang over the green door. A customer came in out of the gray afternoon. Lily looked up from her marine biology and waved. The big, uncomplicated, gap-toothed wave she gave to everyone. The wave that had once stopped a man on a sidewalk and changed the shape of all their lives. And the customer, a stranger, surprised, waved back. Some things just have holes, Lily informed the stranger who had not asked, but you can still tell what they are. And Maya, wiring an arrangement with the eye Gus always said she had, in a shop with her name on the door, with a man she'd taught to be brave killing orchids in the back, smiled down at the cold green stems and did not correct her daughter, because her daughter was right, and had been right all along, and was going to grow up knowing it. You can still tell what they are. Holes and on.